My mother left when I was a toddler and never showed up during the hard times. Years later, she showed up conveniently for the easy times. AITA for not letting her have it easy. I want to be honest with you about something before this story starts. I was not a good kid. Not in the way people mean when they say it fondly. Not mischievous. Not spirited. I mean I was genuinely difficult in ways that cost the people around me real time and real money and real sleep. I know that now. At the time I just thought I was reacting. Turns out there's not much difference between a reaction and a choice when you're 15 and you've been carrying something since birth that nobody gave you the language for. I'm going to tell you what I did. I'm not going to make it sound better than it was. But I'm also going to tell you what was there before any of it, because that part matters too. My father raised me alone from day one. I'm not going to dress that up with adjectives. He was there, every single day. School runs and packed lunches and sitting outside changing rooms in sports shops looking patient while I tried on trainers. He was there for the boring parts and the hard parts and the parts that didn't make the highlight reel. He didn't get a partner in it. He didn't get weekends off. He got me full time with no instruction manual and no backup. He never once made me feel like a burden. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. My biological mother lived 40 minutes away for most of my childhood. Same county. Overlapping world. I won't go deep into the early years because some of that belongs to a version of me that was too small to protect himself, and I don't put him on display. What I'll tell you is that by the time I was old enough to understand the shape of the situation, I had already learned to stop looking for something that wasn't going to look back. I want you to hold that detail. It becomes important later. Her parents, my biological grandparents, were a different kind of problem. They spent the better part of a decade trying to remove me from my father through the courts. Not because they wanted me, because they couldn't control their own daughter and I was the next available thing to control. My father spent money he didn't have in years he couldn't get back sitting in waiting rooms and meeting with solicitors, and keeping his voice calm in rooms where people were trying to take his son away. He kept his voice calm every single time. I know what that cost him. I didn't know then. By my early teens, things had quieted down legally. She'd largely disappeared. I'd filed her under irrelevant and moved on. I had my father. I had a life. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine and it was real, and I was slowly becoming a person. Then she got married. Then she had children. Then, apparently, she decided she wanted a complete set. I was 15 when she first made contact through lawyers. My father sat me down and told me straight, the way he always did. She was requesting access. She had a legal team. She was prepared to push. My father asked me how I felt. I told him I felt nothing about her specifically. I felt quite a lot about the fact that she'd apparently waited until she had a husband and a house and small children who could benefit from an older sibling before deciding I was worth locating. My father nodded, said he understood, said he'd handle it. I said, I know you will. He did for a while. But she was persistent, and she had money, and eventually the court decided, with the particular wisdom of institutions that deal in paper rather than people, that I should be given the opportunity to spend time in her home. Not a request, a ruling. I was 15 years old and I was told I would be spending alternating weekends with a woman I did not know, in a house I had never been to, with two children who had been told their big brother was coming to stay. My father held my gaze when he told me. He said, I'm going to keep fighting this, but for now I need you to try. I said I would try. I meant it when I said it. The first weekend I was mostly quiet, sat where I was told to sit, ate what was put in front of me, answered questions with the minimum viable response. Her husband, I'll call him Martin, tried very hard. He had the energy of a man who had been briefed extensively and was determined to execute the brief correctly. He asked about football. He asked about school. He suggested we might watch a film together. I said I was tired. Her children, a girl of about 7 and a boy of 5, watched me from a careful distance like small animals assessing a new element in their habitat. I didn't interact with them. I wasn't cruel. I was simply absent in a way that a 7-year-old cannot fully process but absolutely feels. I'm going to call her Carol because I need something to call her, and that's not her name, spent the weekend performing. That's the only word for it. She had planned meals. She had planned activities. She had a guest room that had been decorated with the kind of deliberate neutrality that suggested she'd thought about it too much. She asked me questions with the careful warmth of someone who'd read an article about reconnecting with estranged children. I answered them correctly and without content. I went home Sunday evening. My father asked how it was. I said fine. He looked at me for a moment the way he did when he knew fine meant something else. He didn't push. Second weekend, I was less quiet. Here's the thing about Carol's life that I understood very quickly. It was curated. Everything in it had a correct appearance. The house looked a specific way. The children behaved a specific way at specific times. Martin had a role and played it. Dinner parties happened on the right evenings with the right people. She had built something that looked, from every external angle, exactly like a successful and loving family. I was the only element that hadn't been properly formatted. And I was 15. And I was angry. And I had inherited from somewhere a very precise understanding of where the load-bearing walls were in any given social structure. The second weekend, I started finding them. Small things at first. She had a friend visiting Saturday afternoon, the kind of friend that mattered to her image. I sat in the living room, and when the conversation reached me, I answered questions about my life with my father with just enough warmth and specificity to make it clear, without saying anything remotely accusable, that I had a real and full life that had nothing to do with anyone in this room. Her friend looked at her just once briefly. Carol smiled through it. Third weekend, I started being present at inconvenient moments. I would appear in the kitchen when she was having a phone call and simply make tea, visibly, while she tried to wrap up. I would sit near her and Martin when they were clearly trying to have a quiet conversation and read a book with complete innocence. I got very good at the facial expression of someone who is simply existing in a space and cannot be accused of anything. Martin started looking at me differently by week 4, not with the determined warmth of the briefed husband, with something warier. Carol kept performing, but the performance was getting more effortful. By month 2, I had stopped being subtle. Her dinner parties became my favorite occasions. Not because I caused scenes, I never caused scenes. Because I was simply, precisely, authentically myself in a room full of people she needed to impress. I would discuss my father warmly and at length to anyone who asked. I would answer questions about my living situation with a fond nostalgia that made it clear, without a single accusable word, that I considered this house a temporary inconvenience. I perfected the ability to look faintly confused when she referred to herself in any maternal context, as though the concept was genuinely puzzling to me. At her birthday dinner, a thing she had clearly wanted to include me in for the optics of it, she made a toast. She talked about family and new beginnings. She looked at me once while she was saying it. I held eye contact. I didn't smile, not hostilely, just didn't. Martin put his glass down slightly too hard. The children were starting to understand that something was wrong even if they couldn't name it. The 7-year-old had stopped trying to show me things. The 5-year-old still occasionally wandered near me with the hopeful persistence of small children who haven't learned yet to read a room. I was never unkind to them, but I gave them nothing. And a child who has been told their brother is coming and receives nothing learns something from that. I knew that. I did it anyway. That's the part I'm not proud of. I want to be clear about that now so I'm not pretending later. They were children. They were innocent of everything. Using their eventual confusion and hurt as a slow-acting instrument against their mother, even passively, was not something a good person does. I wasn't being a good person. I was being a wounded one. There's a difference, but it's not an excuse. Month 3 is when it turned darker. I stopped performing indifference and started performing presence in a different way. I began asking Carol questions, direct ones, timed carefully, when Martin was in the room, when the children were nearby, when she had no clean exit. Why did you decide to reach out when you did? Was it always the plan? Do Martin's parents know the full history, or just the version you told them? Do you find it strange living this close to where I grew up? You must have driven past the school at some point. I never raised my voice. I never used a word that could be reported. I asked questions the way someone asks questions when they genuinely want to understand something, with my face open and my tone light and my eyes giving absolutely nothing away. She started to look at me like she didn't know what I was. Martin started leaving rooms when I entered them. My father on Sunday pickups began looking at me with an expression I now understand was concern, wearing the mask of composure. He asked once gently if I was doing okay over there. I said yes. He said, "You'd tell me if you weren't." I said, "Of course." I wasn't okay. I wasn't telling him. The thing about sustained, intelligent, low-grade psychological warfare against someone who has hurt you is that it doesn't just cost them. It costs you. I was becoming harder, colder, more deliberate in a way that had stopped feeling like survival and started feeling like something I was choosing every morning. Month 4, she called my father. She said she couldn't manage my behavior. She said I was disrupting her household. She said I was cold and manipulative, and she felt I was having a negative impact on her children. My father listened. Then he asked her very calmly to be specific about what I had done. She couldn't be specific, because I hadn't done anything she could point to. That had been the whole architecture of it. My father said he would speak to me. He drove to pick me up that Sunday, and he was quiet most of the way home. Then he said, "Whatever you're doing over there, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong to be angry, but I need you to tell me what's actually happening." I told him some of it, not all. He said, "This is going to come back around." He was right. It always is with him. Month 5, she sent me back. Not asked. Sent. Had Martin drive me to my father's house on a Wednesday with a bag and a letter for my father that I wasn't supposed to read but did. The letter said I was emotionally disturbed, that I required professional intervention, that she was concerned for her children's well-being in my presence, that she felt, with great reluctance, that the current arrangement was not in anyone's best interest. Then she sued my father. The claim was essentially that he had failed to prepare me adequately for reintegration, that his parenting had produced someone who was psychologically unable to form family bonds, that the court-ordered arrangement had broken down due to his negligence. My father read the letter at the kitchen table. I watched his face. He was very still for a long time. Then he said, "All right." Just that, all right. He made 2 phone calls that evening. The second one was to a solicitor he'd used before. I heard him from the hallway. He wasn't angry, he was precise. He said, "She's opened a door. I want to walk through it properly." The court proceedings took several months. I'm not going to give you the procedural details because they're not the point. What I'll tell you is that the process required full disclosure. Everything. The history of her absence. The grandparents' previous legal campaigns. The decade my father had spent in courtrooms before I was old enough to understand what courtrooms were. The circumstances of the current arrangement. My behavior during it. All of it. There was a court-appointed therapist, Dr. Ellison. She was not warm in the way therapists in films are warm. She was precise and direct and asked questions in the particular way of someone who is interested in accuracy rather than comfort. She interviewed my father, she interviewed Carol, she interviewed Martin, she interviewed me 3 separate sessions. In the 3rd session, she asked me about the questions I'd been asking Carol, specific ones. She had clearly been briefed. I sat with that for a moment. Then I told her exactly what I'd been doing and why. She didn't react, she just wrote something down. Then she asked, "What were you hoping would happen?" I opened my mouth to answer and found that I didn't have one. Not a real one. I'd been so focused on the doing of it that I hadn't asked myself where I was trying to get to. She waited. I said I think I wanted her to see that I knew what she was doing, that she couldn't just arrange me into the picture and have me behave like I didn't have a history. Dr. Ellison wrote something else down. Then she said, "Did it work?" I said she sent me back. She said that wasn't what I asked. I thought about that for a long time after I left. I'm still thinking about it in some ways. The mediation session is the part I'll remember longest. It was a room with a table and several chairs, and the kind of institutional carpet that seems specifically designed to dampen the significance of whatever happens on top of it. Carol was there with her solicitor. My father was there with his. Dr. Ellison was present as the appointed mediator. I was there because I had requested to speak, and the request had been granted. Carol had prepared something. She read from notes. She talked about her intentions, her hopes for the relationship, the impact my behavior had had on her children. She used the word healing 4 times. She used the phrase moving forward twice. She looked at me once while she was speaking briefly and then away. When she finished, Dr. Ellison asked if I wanted to respond. I said yes. I didn't have notes. I told them that I didn't doubt Carol felt genuine things about the situation. I told them I believed she had convinced herself that what she wanted was reconciliation. I told them I also believed that what she actually wanted was resolution, which is a different thing. Resolution of her own guilt. Resolution of the gap in her family portrait. She had done the hard years without me, and now the hard years were over, and she wanted to arrive at the part where she got credit for showing up. She wanted to skip from abandonment to reunion without the middle. She wanted, as I'd watched her want for 5 months, the easy part. I said her children were going to grow up and ask questions, and the answers to those questions were going to be hard, and I was sorry that would be difficult for them, but I wasn't able to make it easier by pretending. I didn't have it in me, and I wasn't going to perform it. I said I wanted no contact, not managed contact, not supervised contact, not holiday contact. None. I said my father had spent my entire childhood building something real out of a situation he hadn't chosen, and I was not going to spend my life managing the feelings of a woman who had spent that same time living 40 minutes away and looking the other way. The room was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "I know what I did in that house wasn't right. I'm not defending it, but I need you to understand that a 15-year-old doesn't develop that kind of cold precision in a vacuum. Something made me like that. I've been working out what it was for the last several months, and I think I'm getting there." Dr. Ellison was looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Carol was looking at the table. The ruling came 6 weeks later. No further contact was mandated. The arrangement was dissolved. My father's counterclaim, for legal costs spanning the current proceedings and documented costs from the previous decade of litigation initiated by Carol's parents, with whom she was found to have been in communication throughout, was upheld in significant part. Carol's legal aggression had become the architecture of her own loss. She had opened discovery. She had forced everything into the light, and in the light, the history of what my father had navigated alone looked exactly like what it was. We used the settlement to move. Different city, clean start. The day we drove out, I sat in the passenger seat and watched the city get smaller in the side mirror. My father had the radio on low. He didn't say anything profound. He just drove. After about an hour, he said, "You hungry?" I said, "Yeah." We stopped at a Services, had terrible coffee and reasonable sandwiches. He complained about the price. I told him he said that every time. He said it was outrageous every time. That was it. That was the whole moment. That was enough. I'm in my late 20s now. I've had time to look back at that 15-year-old with something that isn't quite sympathy and isn't quite judgment. Something in between. Something honest. What I did in that house was wrong. Not legally. Not in any way anyone could have acted on. But wrong in the way that things are wrong when you take something real, real pain, real history, real grievance, and turn it into a precision instrument. I was clever about it. I was effective. And I aimed it, at least partially, at children who had done nothing and understood nothing. I've thought about that girl a lot. The 7-year-old who stopped showing me things. I don't know what she understood from those weekends. I hope not much. I hope she's fine. I genuinely do. The circumstances that made me that way, I don't think they're unaccountable for it. I think if you understand what had happened, the years of it, the weight of it, you can draw a straight line from cause to effect. That line is real. Dr. Ellison helped me see it and helped me see that understanding it wasn't the same as being finished with it. But a straight line from cause to effect is not the same thing as an excuse. I've had to hold both of those at once. It took a while to learn how. My father is well. He's more relaxed than I've ever seen him. He built something good in that new city. He's got a life that has some space in it finally. I call him most days. Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's an hour. He still complains about the price of things. Carol, I don't think about much. She sent one letter years ago. I haven't responded. Not because I'm angry. I'm mostly not angry anymore. But because I said what I needed to say in that room, and the silence since then has been the clearest I've ever felt. I was the kid who waved in a grocery store and learned, slowly, that nobody was waving back. That lesson shaped me in ways I'm still finding. Some of them useful. Some of them I've had to unlearn. The useful ones came from my father. They always did. He showed up, every single day, for the boring parts and the hard parts and the parts that cost him more than I knew. That's what I know about family. Everything else is just biology.